Well, happy Martin Luther King Day, my man, Kevin Howard. And it's so nice to connect with you. And I know that I have had you on hold while I was trying to deal with just kind of silly stuff on this Martin Luther King Day 2024. But it's so nice to see you. I understand that you were out of power for the weekend.
Yeah, we Pacific Power, 40,000 Pacific Power customers lost power. And so it wasn't a snowstorm. It was just kind of a frost storm. We did have winds 30 to 40 miles per hour and stuff like that on the coast, but it was through the central corridor and the west coast of the state. And so yeah, we were out. Let's see, it went out at about 11 o'clock on Saturday, and it didn't come back on until 10 no 9:45 Sunday night.
Oh, man, that's
Yeah,
rough.
yeah. And
That's a,
so and
that's
the,
a long time.
no, it's some time, and the temperature was kind of cold for the coast. I would say the temperatures peaked at like 30, 32 degrees and stuff like that. So it wasn't like Montana, or even some of the mountainous Utah weather that y'all might have and stuff like that, or but it was
We
cold for
had
the
we had
coast.
blizzard after blizzard, and the snow is just really finally because we were pretty dry for the first part of November, December, and then now we've just been getting walloped. And so it's great to see the snow. It makes it beautiful, and but
Yeah.
no emergency power outages. Maybe we're kind of supposedly designed, unlike Texas, for cold weather, and we know how to respond. Like any society you would think in the modern era would, but barring any massive emergencies. But I know that the weather has been, monumental all over the country, and we can see a lot of folks like, what, climate change, global warming? I don't understand. What are you talking? It's snowing. It's colder than it's ever been, and people don't have a clue about how things work. So
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's and it does tie into what we want to talk about. But look, we're recording this, and hopefully we'll make it public. I certainly hope to, because we're a team. We're trying to develop what we call the Clean New Deal, and it's a great day to talk on Martin Luther King Day, because I
Yeah.
really, it's an expression, it's extension, it's a sort of continuation of what Dr. King had expressed, and obviously on that fateful day in April 4th, 1968, when he was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was there because he was standing in solidarity with um,
Yes.
with those that were fighting systemic predation and systemic racism. And
Yeah.
that was where he thought the dream could ultimately, or would have to, prevail for us to achieve the vision of the monumental "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963, of course. And so when you consider everything that took place between 1963 and 1968, and the Vietnam War and all of those things, I mean, it's kind of like, it really does help me have some clarity on how difficult this righteous grind has been for myself, having created the con and everything that I've been able to aggregate this whole time against the system of what I see as complete carnage and collapse of society right in front of our eyes, and stupidity, monumental stupidity in every direction. But because we've had an absolute breakdown of our systems, of the integrity of our systems, of our government, of our federal government, and
Mhm.
basically media. That's where I'm coming from, because people cannot wrap their heads around the truths that we've spent years and millions of dollars to get, because the system has put its knee on our neck. I hate to use the revelation, but
Yes.
that's exactly right.
I like it.
But
Yeah.
but on this Martin Luther King Day, it's extremely important to make these 2 points initially, and then I'm going to let you roll with it, and then we'll take it from there. But look, where my mind is right now is really what we discovered when we were pulling the threads to create the con. So, as you
Mhm.
know, I myself, like you, had experienced absolute a mighty fall from the world, that the life that we were living, and we got swept up in all of the aftermath of the collapse of the 2008 great financial crisis. But as I moved forward to make the con, because nothing made sense, I was experiencing my own reality. I knew that things were not adding up because I had enough common sense and professionalism in certain things to know that there was something very peculiar taking place. But my journey led me to discover, because I was able as a producer to put the funding mechanisms together to go ask the right questions in a way that you do when you're an investigative journalist. And the pathway led us to none other than a woman out of Akron, Ohio, a 91-year-old African American woman who had survived and overcome the Great Migration, Jim Crow, redlining, all of those things that were systemic racism and predation that, of course, Dr. King was in solidarity to draw more clarity to when he was assassinated. Um, Addie Polk was what I found, the unbelievable pronunciation of it all,
Yeah.
the the sort of almost it was almost when I look back at it, Kevin, she was like this, not just a clarion call, but she was almost like, at least personally for me, like an otherworldly sense. Because when we discovered Addie Polk's story, Addie Polk had an immense tragedy. She ended up committing suicide at the age of 91, the day that she was being evicted and foreclosed upon in a house that she had lived in for 4 decades. As we ultimately uncovered, she was a victim of what we call straw buy, which is one of literally hundreds of different versions of methodologies of fraud, of documentation fraud, of ways to steal through identity theft, through the machinations of how our system operates, to be able to realize loans that Miss Polk was none the wiser of, because things were happening behind her that she wasn't aware of. And so the safety of her home, the American dream, the sort of personification was what I was trying to say earlier, right? Of Dr. Dream's vision, Dr. King's vision, that it became our nightmare. It became our collective nightmare. And ultimately, through her tragedy, however, she was able to provide the miracle that led us to discover that, oh, wait a second, all of the things that she was in the midst of, oh, were indeed illegal. And because of the actual, I hate to call it courage, because it's not courage to do your job, but let's just say the professionalism of the AG of Ohio and the task force that set out to find answers, not just to Addie Polk, but other situations that were happening in the region, uncovered that, lo and behold, this was indeed a racketeering enterprise. And as we discovered, that racketeering enterprise was exactly the entirety of what our financial system did to create a $4.5 trillion housing market that exploded into a $800 trillion derivatives market that all imploded on itself because of the lies that we reveal in the con, which were all illegal. And I'll finish with this thought because it's going to be a big part of our discussion. As it turns out, later I found out that Donald Trump, of course, who's campaigning in Iowa and the caucuses, and boldly pronounced today that this is going to be a referendum on the cheaters, out of his lips. This is a referendum on the cheaters, that he had indeed sued Deutsche Bank for being a victim of predatory lending. I found that out later because there was a journalist that I was working with by the name of David Enrich, who wrote Shadow Towers, which was the story of Deutsche Bank and really its intersection with Donald Trump and all things Russia and all the rest of it. But Deutsche Bank has been a fraud shop for a very long time. It's one of the largest, what we call systemically important financial institutions out of Germany, and been involved with all sorts of fraud for years and years and years, and having been fined billions of dollars laundering money for Russia, among other things. In a turnabout of, like, are you kidding me? Donald Trump, the so-called billionaire, was basically acting as if he had experienced what Addie Polk had experienced. I shine a light on that to you and anybody we share this with, because I'm sorry, that's reality. That's something that I have to contend with every day as I try to fight through, I would call what it feels like, not just the front lines, but it feels like trench warfare, Kevin. Trying to get these truths to the American people in a way that can suddenly rally what you and I are trying to achieve, with what our projected goal is, what we call the Clean New Deal. So that's a long ramp up. Now it's time for me to be quiet and allow you to interpret what I set up on this day, what this day might mean for you, and then go wherever it naturally takes you based on my recent interview with William K. Black and your kind of vision of where we are and what's important to you, my friend.
Yeah, no, I appreciate certainly everything you said, Patrick. I know because I know your story and because we've been working together now for, for several weeks, probably a few months, let's say, in this journey of truth. I'm late to your part. I mean, this is the start of year 14 for you in terms of chasing down how this happened. Not only how this happened to Addie Polk, but how this happened to you, how this happened to me, how this happened to millions of Americans. And we're talking about um, the victims of the great financial crash of 2008, 2009, and how it was actually not an accident, that it was very intentional, and that it was the tip of a very broad scheme to rob people of assets and income and retirement savings and even their homes, that they came about very honestly, you know. So like in the case of Addie Polk, she had just taken out a small loan, to do some repairs. Her house was already completely paid for, but her husband had paid for the house. They lived in it many years. He passed away. He left her well taken care of with a house free and clear, a pension, his pension and her pension and everything. So she was fine. And she took out a small loan just to do some repairs on a house that had been several decades old. But it was her house. She had pride in her house. And that opened the door for these con artists to replicate the loan that she had made, just a small modest loan, and they just added more and added more and added more. Didn't even give it to there's no evidence that she was aware that they were doing this, but it was this spiral of loans, increased loans, that required appraisals that valued her house way more than it was actually worth, right? Again, all this outside of her view, until when those loans finally, when the train stopped and they finally either paid for those loans, they came to take her house. Those loans went into foreclosure. So she didn't understand. She just did not understand. How is this possible that I'm losing my house? The only thing I've done is take out a modest loan, and maybe from her point of view, she had paid it off based on the information she had. But it gives you a sense of just how profound the level, how audacious the level of fraud that was, and on a 90-year-old woman, right, who had done nothing wrong, right, right, okay. And so she became very much, I equate it during the civil rights movement, and I'm so happy we're talking about this on the day we celebrate Dr. King's life. And the turning point in the civil rights movement for a lot of Americans was, I believe the year was 1965. It might have been 66, when the church had been blown up with the 6 Black children in it. And it was when the nation, the consciousness of the nation was shocked at the idea that amidst the hatred involved in the nonviolent protesters involved in the civil rights movement, the resistance that they were getting, there was so much hate that it could result in the blowing up of a church, killing these 6 little girls. And so it was that kind of event that really rocked the consciousness of the nation. And probably many historians view that as a turning point in terms of the coalescing, the nation coalescing. But I think it's relevant. And so Addie Polk, in many ways, is that type of, um, for lack of a better word, that kind of victim. She didn't deserve to be a victim. She didn't do anything to make herself a victim, but she was victimized because ultimately she could not escape, and she chose to take her life, as opposed to becoming homeless. But the indignity of being forced out of her home, you know, at 91 years old. So in so many ways, for so many people around the country who went through that financial crash, yourself and myself included, people who, well, whatever your level of education, whatever your level of business savvy, you just couldn't imagine you would find yourself in a scenario where you're negotiating to try to keep your house and it's way out of control and there's no one you could talk to and there's no one you could work with and it's and you say, how did this even happen, and you start going down the rabbit hole and all you get is more layers of that stop you from figuring anything out. And what you did in the con was you didn't stop at Addie Polk, but she became a wonderful um, a symbol to humanize where this was, this loss that so many Americans experienced. And so, how could this possibly happen in America? Since this is Dr. King's birthday, if we look at the civil rights movement, one of the lessons that I feel that has been forgotten in uh, with folks who seek justice for any number of causes in today's context, but I'll make it relevant to causes that Dr. King was fighting. So the modern version of, let's say, people fighting on behalf of people of color, for example, would be like the Black Lives Matter movement. And if you look at the extent to which we as a country have been have come together because our conscience has been tugged at. That because deep inside we all want justice, right? You will notice that the Black Lives Matter movement has not been able to achieve anything like that. But Dr. King was in the civil rights movement was able to achieve, able to get a Southern Democrat like LBJ to pass, sweeping civil rights legislation, to pass sweeping voters' rights legislation to the point where on his presidential tapes, he mentioned signing these bills that the Democratic Party has probably lost the South for a generation. Well, he was prescient beyond a generation. It's been multiple generations, and the South has not voted Democratic again, in mass. The point is that the success of the civil rights movement, the ability of the civil rights movement to actually move the needle towards justice, was the fact that Dr. King did not frame the struggle in racial terms. I mean, all you need to do is go to his most famous speech, his "I Have a Dream" speech, and he speaks about us getting to a place in America where little black boys and little black girls will be able to hold hands with little white boys and little white girls, and that will be fine. That will be we will just be brothers and sisters. So he framed the justice and the need for justice broadly, because what human doesn't want that, right? What human doesn't want to be preyed upon like Addie Polk, or any of the other people that you identified in the con, right? All, which I think was great. It was a very diverse group of folks that you showed their stories. Okay, my point is that in order to bring about massive change in a country that's essentially a democracy, and I say essentially because it's at risk, it really is at risk, right? It's going to take massive amounts of people. And the people who do these kind of frauds, the people who are behind $50 trillion, a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the working class and the middle class of this country to the top 1% since 1980, right? That's been validated by many, many sources, right? That magnitude of transfer of wealth to the wealthiest amongst us from working people and middle class people, th- that did not happen by accident. And in order to resolve that issue, right? Those people, those people in power, let's call them the wealthy elites for the sake of this conversation, right? understand that they have to have many layers of defense. Just like when you looked into your mortgage and I looked into my mortgage, and Addie Polk was trying to go through her papers and figure out how did some $4,000 or $5,000 some nominal mortgage turn into something where she was losing her house, right? And all she found is more complexity and all this other stuff. One of the layers of complexity that these bad actors engage in is they have systemically weaponized us. They have taken everything that is distinctive about the American people, their race, their age, their weight, their sex, their gender, their sexual preferences, their consumer preferences, their regional geographic locations. Every identifiable thing about the American public has been weaponized as a basis by which we can fight with each other. And so what you see in America today is a country that at a level of vitriol, a level of dispute, a total inability to solve any type of problem of any consequence that requires cooperation and collaboration. We can't do it anymore. The last 10 years of Congress has been like the least productive Congress in US history, right? Right, because they reflect us. And so what I'm trying to say here is Dr. King understood that the hardest changes, the societal changes, right, require mass cooperation. And so the basis by which you have to appeal to people has to be the fact that they too can see the injustice, and they can see how it either affects them or would affect them if the lights happen to be turned their way. The famous, Jewish, I think it's a Jewish adage about, they came for the Irish, but I wasn't Irish. I did not. Okay. To frame your case for injustice in the manner by which the broadest number of people can recognize it and see themselves victimized by the same thing empowers you to bring about the changes you need. And the wealthy elites understand this. And so as a result, they have encouraged us to fight with each other all the time.
Can I insert some stuff real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, brilliant, and thank you for such a wonderful, majestic interpretation of Addie Polk from a viewer that actually wasn't working on the project, which really inspires me because you understood practically everything that we as filmmakers were trying to express. And we only got half the story with Addie just because of the nature of what we ultimately needed to do with the arc of the story. And in the con that people can find at www.thecon.tv, it's the run up to the actual collapse of the 2008 great financial crisis. We didn't have a chance to go into all of the aftermath, which I've been able to do, a lot of work on a podcast called The New Untouchables. But that's part and parcel to what we want to do with what we're calling kind of a Lollapalooza-like tour to get the information to the people, as we create this sort of groundswell in this pursuit of the Green New Deal, the Clean New Deal. But I wanted to pick up on a couple of things to assist in bridging where we are to where you're going with this, because I want to hear how you interpret it. But I think the audience needs a primer on this as well. So Dr. King obviously challenged us to the very core essence of what we are, which was on everything from a spiritual to an ethical to morally a fabric, but also more importantly to a legal construct. It was, I challenge you, us, we the people, in liberty and justice for all, to live true to what you put down on paper, i.e., the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, all of those things that came, which would go from the 13th and the 14th and whatever amendments that are applicable to this conversation. But he was not wrong, because he understood from the very beginning what Bastiat understood and many others have understood throughout history, that if a group of men discover a way to plunder society, in many cases, they will create a legal system to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it, i.e., unfortunately for the South after the Civil War, Jim Crow, for one example, among others, not to mention the financialization of what we get in sharecropping, which is a precursor Not to mention the whole financial instruments that were used in slavery, by the way. That's a precursor to all of these types of things. But the reason I wanted to insert what I did, this perspective as you're moving forward through this process, we have laws. We have a federal government and a Department of Justice and a Federal Bureau of Investigations and others, AGs and so on and so forth, but that have the capacity, that have the resources, that have the ability and the expertise to make sure that a betrayal of the United States isn't a possibility, is the idea. That because, and this is where we get into a lot of crazy manipulative gymnastics as it gets played out on a daily basis. Like you said, in pursuit of the last democracy that we have hanging by a thread, that there's still a democracy, but it's still hanging by a thread. I personally argue that we don't have a democracy. I don't think, it's a degree of the democracy that we have an expectation for. Those that obviously will argue in the MAGA realm or in the Republican realm, or those that have a specific kind of inquiry, they're going to say that we're a constitutional republic, which a lot of the times means what you're inferring is a rule by the minority through a whole variable of traps of manipulations that you can use the law to create outcomes that are just antithetical to what we put down on paper. So using that sort of as a bridge, where I'm sitting at this moment is that the ability for Dr. King to express and espouse in a peaceful manner, using our intellect and our logic that didn't speak about race, that spoke to the better angels of our nature, was a continuation of what this country had been fighting from its very birth. And ultimately through the Civil War and through the nature of Abraham Lincoln's discretion to say we've got to fight for the better angels of our nature, but ultimately for a country of, by, and for the people is the key consideration. And so in that sort of platform where we're all sort of together in this melting pot of this American ideology, where the rule of law, the integrity is supposed to provide a fair system of which we have upward mobility based on our own ability. But those of us who have common sense know that you have to have a sort of hybrid socialism in specific cases to be able to help people through unemployment, through times where situations get rough. For those that don't like the word socialism, we have public education, which is socialism. We have a military, which is socialism. We have a whole variety of elements of socialism that are part and the police are socialism, the fire department, those that we want to wave the flag in Americana that protect us and everything. You can't manipulate the term, but for me, for somebody who is a entrepreneur and somebody who understands and who is competitive and who has an education and who is a producer who has to live by the code of capitalism, because nobody's going to give me the opportunity to make a $20 million film for free. I'm not getting $20 million. Nobody is providing that to me. And I didn't spend $20 million on the con. We spent $4.5 million to get the $33 trillion truth that became something much bigger. But going back to my point about the law. So what I learned and what we learned through Addie Polk is that the laws all existed to protect Addie Polk. The law protected all of us, supposedly, but it wasn't actually used. And as such, this melting pot that you described, be it African Americans or Latino Americans, quite frankly, that experienced something on the magnitude of, with the 2008 great financial crisis, 55% of African American household wealth evaporated. 60% of Latino American wealth evaporated. But they weren't the only ones. We had everybody get smashed.
Yes.
Not to mention, of course, the white working class, which had their pensions stolen from them, their retirements. And so there was a level of outrage, but nowhere to turn. And as a result of what we didn't get right in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, we made what we're all dealing with now inevitable. I just wanted to give you those kind of those markers because I want you to explain to me how we make people who have lost all sense of institutions and trust in everything because everything has become a lie. But all that has created are more and more lies. And so, what happens in a situation where everybody's lost faith and the only thing that seems to have any influence are those that have the power, those that have the money, that can buy influence, that can buy voices, that can use the technology, that can do whatever they've got to tell us what they want us to tell, without understanding what it is, whether it's for mainstream or whether it's billionaires that have an agenda. How do you extrapolate that situation to help pave the path forward, Kevin, in a way that coincides with your vision?
That's the question. That might be the $70 trillion question, because and the significance of that number in terms of the systemic fraud we're speaking of. To me, I think it starts a part of, you say this quote, one of your favorite quotes is about the what is it? The greatest thing the devil ever did was convince the world he didn't exist. You know, the the a part of the methodology for the audacious plan that is befalling on the country in terms of the magnitude of this systemic fraud and corruption that you have uncovered with the con and the new untouchables is this idea that redefining us, as I mentioned shortly before, all the things that make us distinctive, which would be the kind of things that allows us to start a business, to invent something, to become excellent in our jobs. All those things have been weaponized to be able to be used on demand and encourage us to fight against each other. And the net effect is to convince the average American that they're small and that everything that's affecting their life is too big. Too big to fail, too big to change, too big. Okay. And so this leads to a nihilism, a fatalism, the idea that there's nothing I can do. So the best I can do is within the context of what they will allow me to do, scratch out whatever I have. And this is why so many Americans are unhappy, because scratching out whatever they have is so unfulfilling, is so less than who they actually are. So the first step that I would encourage Americans to do, and this is why I wrote my book, Onward at Last, right? Is the idea is to reclaim, it's time for us to reclaim our sovereignty. And how do we do that? How do we do that? We each have the capacity, no matter our education, our academic standing, or what have you, we have the capacity to discern truth, right? We do not have to simply accept what the evening news spoon feeds us. We do not have to simply accept what they tell us these politicians are doing. This is why running for office costs so much, because everything is spoon fed. We have, with our smartphones, we have with our laptops, the technology, and the information is widely available for us to find out what is true and what's not true, right? And it's incumbent on us to recognize the only way we're going to reclaim our sovereignty is to educate thyself, to find out, to be able to assess if what is actually true about what's affecting your life, to seek those sources that provide you true information, and to reject sources that don't, right? In other words, it does come down to a certain personal responsibility. And I don't say this from an ideological perspective, left or right. I know that sounds fairly conservative, but reality is not conservative or liberal. The reality of the situation is that if you think you're small, you are small. If you think you can't do it, you certainly won't, right? But if you recognize that you have within your control, no matter your level of resource, the capacity to ascertain what is true that drives your life, based on your lived experiences, then now you have that's the kernel you need to inform you that, okay, well, I'm going to align with this. This is the stuff that actually works. This is the stuff that my experience has proven. When I do this, this is, whether that is, your capacity to be there for other people and their tendency to return the favor, right? Your capacity to see people for who they are. If they lie to you one time, don't expect them to tell you the truth the next time, right? These are just the most pragmatic, practical realities of what is true. Because you're right, we live in a pulp fiction. We live at a time where the magnitude of the lies and deceit that's swirling on the outside of us is so profound, right? That if you try to find truth in that context, your head is spinning, and that's why you just curl up in a ball and say, "I'll just be small." But no, we are powerful. We are capable, right? And it's time for us to stand up and take note of what we're capable of doing, be, beyond what they is everything else tell us. We have the capacity to discern truth, and until we do that, we're going to be susceptible to the shiny bauble that someone is trying to sell us, right? Okay, so this is much more
I have to follow up with
foundational.
a question. I hate to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but I have to follow up with a question. Okay. So
sure.
this is part and parcel to the problem that I've experienced firsthand. And I think that most people do because, first of all, we have algorithms. Second of all,
Yeah,
we have mainstream platforms. We have
sure.
legitimacy. We have who are people getting their information from? And there
Yeah,
is a ever growing ocean of information, most of which I say everything I've come into experience with doesn't get it because it's all reactions to what we're laying out. Okay. So, again, going back to the basic premise for me, in order to form a more perfect union based on our shared understanding of the flaws of the United States, but it was a
yeah,
separation of powers that created the Bill of Rights, that created the Constitution, that had many battles to be able to give us both political battles in Congress based on the way the system is supposed to work, with many changes, of course, in terms of how many votes are going to be able to provide this. I mean, the system is always constantly fluctuating, and it depends on who has more influence and control. Because in the end, look, people are people, right? And we're going to have scenarios that those who get to the top are going to want to maintain their position. And a lot of the times they do it by any means necessary. And so that's why Mark Twain, I think, fits when he said that, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. But where we are at the moment, in terms of your point, is that you can't see the forest for the trees because so people do have to go find where the truth is. Okay.
yes, yes,
And then when I say, I used to be very apprehensive about saying the truth because I know the truth in terms of like this ideological truth about a religious or spiritual truth, about whatever those truths are, typically are personal, based on your fixed experience, based on your trajectory, based on all of the factors that make you what you are. But that's not truth. That's different. That's not the ultimate universal truth. Like, for example, what is the truth to me? Like, I've got a great sense of humor and I love satire. Like I can't tell you how many times I've read the book of Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the End to the Galaxy,
yeah,
where the whole proclamation was, okay, you create a computer to get all of these answers we're talking about, but it had to create another computer to have to deal with all the powers that be. And it took millions and millions and millions of years to just basically come up with, you'll never get the answer. And then interesting recently, as a sidebar of how funny this is, the Deep Web's, James Webb Telescope got back this picture of one of the earliest composites of light in the universe, because that's the whole point of the James Webb telescope, is to understand the Big Bang, and it literally found a question mark. You can't, I mean, it's what it looked like, a question mark. It's like that was Douglas Adams. So for people who like think I'm audacious enough to think that when I provide the truth, that somehow I'm speaking in terms of I've like Vivek Ramaswamy, like God is real. Okay, yeah, God is real to you, Vivek, but you don't have any evidence God is real. And I'm sorry, if you claim that you do, then you're a freaking liar, because you don't, I don't, nobody does, and nobody ever has. And I know a lot of people will battle with that with Islam, and they'll battle with that with Christian, whatever. That's part and parcel to the whole thing. But what I'm talking about, what we're talking about, in a system, especially, and this is my message to those that believe themselves to be on the side of law and order. Yeah, there are ways that you devise laws to prevent specific outcomes, that when specific outcomes happen, you do the due diligence of forensic evidence and everything that goes into it, like a murder investigation, and you can prove truth. There is a truth to a specific scenario, of which we're revealing in a gargantuan way, that millions upon millions of people that have been destroyed by the system. So hit the rewind again. It was everybody. It was everybody but the top 0.001%. Even the 1% got hit for a long time, until, because of the $70 trillion that you referenced, that I continue to reveal all the time, the $70 trillion that I'd say 50% of it we can prove was illegal, in terms of what the Federal Reserve did to provide the financial system this incredible resource based on the collective full faith and credit of the United States, went to that many people, where the rest of us in every direction are on the gerbil wheel, in debt, struggling, trying to find ways. And so without the understanding of the who did what, when, and how, sorry, to murder, this is the theme of the day. I have a dream. Who murdered the American dream? Addie Polk is the connection. We know who murdered the American dream. And as such, there's forensic, I mean, from across the board, and that's our work. And there's so much more. www.thecon.tv. But to get back to your point, though, because that's a long segue and a bridge, people have a hard time finding what is suppressed. And I hate to give Elon Musk any credit because of where he's gone, but there is censorship in a massive way. It's also on his platform, and it's also in mainstream media, and it's also everywhere, on Google, on YouTube, on Facebook, on the whole thing is censorship. But there is a fight right now, and there's a fight that's exploiting everybody who doesn't understand what's going on, and who obviously is feeling it in their everyday lives, but they can't. They know which one, the way the wind's blowing, but they don't know. And I hate to use this as an analogy, who their wife slept with. They sense it, but they don't know who did what, when, and how, and what they don't have the evidence. And if they did, I think everything would change.
Well, Patrick, let me just suggest one further penalty that many of us suffer from. And Bill Black references this in terms, when you have a situation where liars win, what it does to everyone who's trying to survive is it dilutes why truth matters. And so when I say that people need to reclaim their sovereignty, they need to look into their personal experiences. They need to look into the lived experiences and rediscover what has worked in your life to build what you wanted to build the things that you truly value. What has worked, right? Because most recently, what seems to be working is something else. If you look at all the examples, no matter the industry, the politics, entertainment, or whatever, you see a lot of deceit. You see a lot of illicit. This is the tragedy of when the best and the brightest cheat, right? Right. So then, in order to get by, a lot of people down the food chain are smudging, smudge it. And some people are completely lost because they have no other choice, right? Because that's how far down the food chain it is in order to survive. And so it becomes 1984. We're up is down and down is up. And so no. We need to remind people, no, the reason why the person laying in bed to you loves you, the reason why your children respect you is because you actually show up when you say you're going to show up. When you do a job, you do a job, and no one has to look over your shoulder. And and I know the person who, oh, don't get him to do the job because they're not going to do a good job. In other words, there are things in our lives that make us feel proud, that make us feel worthy, that make us feel like we are doing something and contributing something. And those things are achieved through integrity, through character, right? And that if we can reconnect with that and then turn back around to the world and find your tribe. Don't look to the people who are not doing that anymore, right? Try to encourage them to reconnect with themselves so that they can remember what makes life good. Because the thing about it is that the cheating and the deceit and all the compromises we make weigh on us. We suffer from profound cognitive dissonance because the way to success in America today makes us feel like shit. Right? I mean, how many bodies do you have to climb over to be in the big house? And if you're not willing to do it, someone else is going to climb over your body, right? Okay, this is the environment in which we're in. And therefore, and if we don't want that, if we want to have any chance of changing that, because this is what you're speaking to an actual network of folks who are totally lost. They will target a 91-year-old woman. They will target a divorcee. They will target someone who has a family that's trying to take care of their family. They will target pensioners who work 50 years in iron mills and shit like that, and only making $3,000 a month. They're gonna cut that person's income in half, and they already have fortunes, billions. I mean, these people are sociopathic. What they're doing, right? But they set a tone because they throw more money at people downstream than those people have ever been able to access. And that's what convinces them to sell their souls and do the things like knocking on Addie Polk's door, sending a Black person into a Black neighborhood to knock on a 91-year-old woman's door to make sure that you're going to steal her house. I mean, damn, I don't know how you sleep at night. This is where we are. This is the tragedy that you said the democracy, this is what America has become, right? Okay, but we don't have to be that way. The idea that that's what humanity is not true. Right here within ourselves, we have the capacity to look into our lives. Oh, I'm sure the last few years there's been some compromises. Fine, forgive yourself. It's been a dogfight out here. But at the end of the day, look at what has been good about your life, what has actually worked about your life. This is the truth that I speak to. The truth that helps you to understand how things work, the truth that builds your sense of purpose, your sense of self-worth, right? And stuff like that, because this kaleidoscope of manipulation has literally convinced us to forget who we are.
You just inspired me from a standpoint of like Dr. King did, and you're in rarefied air there, my friend, and I'm so proud to know you. But what you're saying is, and this has always been my message, you're liberating yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no faith in, and so on and so forth
Right.
with Bob, man. But look, just real quick to that point, though. Again, that is such a powerful truth. And boy, if we could electrify the millions out there to just like let things fall, to let them understand that they've got brothers in arms with us, that we represent two different people, two different kinds of like backgrounds, everything else, but yet we're coming together with the same causation and the force of nature and the same sort of trajectory of what always inspired me from the time I think I was 6 years old. The first time I watched Dr. King's speech where it resonated with me. Like there was something about that as a child. Well, maybe it was because I wanted to see, all of God's children, sitting around,
Yeah,
the dinner table of plenty. And I thought, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's who that was the
that's
force of
what kids
nature.
do. That's what
Right.
kids do
That was the
naturally
force of
until we
nature that
teach
I
them that.
that I remember my whole life. But again, I want to remind people, and I want you to consider this as you're moving forward from onwards at last. Once again, like I like to say, look, I say corruption births and fuels fascism. I say that we're leading a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption and the fascism it fuels because we're creating an exodus from corruption to create the redemption of the American dream. Again, all hyperbole, all those types of things. But from my come from, it's premised on the fact that I did years and years of work. This did not come because I wanted to feel good about somebody else's work that conveyed that to me that I was living vicariously from. No, I literally had to go to the ends of the universe and back, through hell and back, through the trench warfare of getting this information that is what the federal government failed to deliver to the American people because, and this is the ultimate takeaway, we are not a government of, by, and for the people. We are a government of, by, in 2023, 2024, given everything that's going on. This is what set me on my path to discovery. We are a government of, by, and for the corruption of the corporation. And here's the ultimate takeaway. And I know people out there hate to hear me say this, but it's the truth. It's socialism for the top 1% because top 0.001% primarily that everybody gets a piece of at the top 5% if they're professionals, just because of the way it works with assets and stocks and those types of things. It's not an economy, but it's a facade because we use the full faith and credit of the United States to illegally pump tens of trillions of dollars to this systemic thing, this blob, this network that you talked about, which for me is old tyranny, old monarchy, old dictatorship, old every of the worst expressions of humanity throughout history. And it always comes from corruption. It always has, it always will. And so back to you, my friend.
No, no, I hear you, but here's the thing. The only advantage we have. So you have the information, Patrick. I know it. I can't wait till America realizes that you're the man with the information and have shown the way. But here's the thing. The only advantage we have, because we know that they have a magnitude of wealth beyond measure. Okay. The only advantage we have is our numbers. So if we're going to use our numbers, and we have all been in, we didn't know that we were in a gladiator's pit. That these people have tightened the screws on capitalism to the point where it's who's, if you're not willing to cut someone's throat, you're going to be 10 steps behind. We're going to have to forgive each other. We cannot, we have ever on purpose. It's sort of like, the gangs in the neighborhood or the mafia. You bring the young Don in who wants to be someone, he wants to be made, and you make him do some ugly shit up front. You make him kill some people and you hold the hook on him so that if he wants to get soft and stuff like that, he becomes the setup, right? Okay, a lot of us in order to keep our lights on, have done things, and I don't mean necessarily illegal things, but have accepted the bait of saying, oh, yeah, they're the scapegoats. And so they've done things against other working people, or they have taken the crumbs off the table from the wealth at to do the dirty work for other people. We got to forgive each other. We have every reason. They have given and they've put us in a situation where we've been fighting and scrapping and clawing, right? This is the biggest, why the Black Lives Matter movement failed to have any effect is, in fact, they got blowback. It's because they fell into the bait the debate of all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. I don't care if the Proud Boys were the ones or whomever said all lives matter, right? All lives matter is true. To make all lives matter into a racist statement, right, is to tell everyone else that you don't think all lives matter, that you think the only thing that matters is Black Lives Matter. And so you could be rest assured there were lots of people who'd be sensitive to this issue. If instead of responding by making all lives matter into a racist chant, right, by saying, yes, all lives matter. And if all lives matter, what's happening in South Detroit, where they just close off the neighborhood and let people kill each other, right? If you know, make the argument for why Black lives have not mattered, but you don't have to sacrifice the fact that white lives matter. Hispanic life. Okay,
Well,
so
let me point out another trick though.
but I just want to put a bow on that. My point is that we have been pitted against each other for years, right? Now that we need each other, now that all we have is each other, we have to be able to appeal to each other in a way that doesn't indict each other. We have to stop our fight in order to turn our guns where they need to go. Where's all the money? It's upstream. And that's all I'm saying. So yes, do I have, as a person of color, do I have an axe to grind against the white working class when the white working class cut the deal after slavery with white wealth to create the Klan and keep Black people down in order to get their access to the American dream, which they leveraged through Jim Crow? Yeah, they made the deal with the devil, and now they have been abandoned. So what? So I need to hold that against them? No, now they understand we have to forgive each other so we can get together. Now we can help each other, right? But that's the problem. The problem is people, they have been gifting us, just like any organized crime syndicate. Everyone is isolated downstream so that they can never have the power to knock off the boss. Well, we have to resist that by first forgiving each other. This is my criticism of Dr. West. I love him. Love Dr. West. That's a love beacon right there. Too heavy on the 400 years. Too heavy on the Black experience. Yes, that's true, and yes, but we're at a moment where we have to get past that, because it's not just about that. And if Dr. King can get past it, we can get past it today. And so, because at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? Do we want to have a government for the people, by the people, of the people? If we do, we have to band together. The only resource we have left, besides the truth, which you have, is our numbers. And we have to get everyone to stand together. And they will stand together behind the truth, but not at the price of subjugation.
Okay, fine, but they have to also hear. I mean, like my promulgation for that whole thing has always been it's the money versus the many versus the money. Okay, I was thinking about that 10 years ago. All right, and then I got more and more information. This is the standard divide and conquer. This is the the wherewithal of a Joseph Goebbels like propaganda that he and Hitler gave a lot of credence to Jim Crow South, and they got the Nuremberg laws from Jim Crow. They were inspired by Jim Crow. We inspired the Nazis. Okay, so yeah, amen. In the ultimate revelation, I've been thinking about this one for decades when I first heard it, because I'm from Texas originally. But LBJ had not once, I don't know how many times he said it, but I've heard it many times. He said, if you convince the lowest rung white man that he's higher on the ladder than the highest rung Black man, then you can pick his pockets all day. Now, that's why I want to bring it full circle to where the predation networks of this hyena capitalism, I'll call it, because it's just basically theft. That's what it is. It's racketeering. It's monopolies. It's all of these types of things. But we've had that forever, Kevin. We've had it forever. We've also fought it forever, and we've had the whole challenge of the United States has been back and forth, back and forth. What we never had to the level that we had in 2009 was our Federal Reserve allowing tens of trillions of dollars to the guys that did it and then got away with it. And by the way, let's point out a reality which you and I both agree with. It was the first African American president and the first African American attorney general that
Yeah.
decided,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
it's too
That,
hard.
that closed the door.
It's too
Yes.
hard. And
Yes.
so that created this
That's true.
this groundswell that was added to the history and everything else. But what people need to understand is that what we're providing you is a bridge to where everybody got ensnared and trapped, from minority targets of predation, particularly in
Absolutely.
household, well, to white working class and pensions and everything else, where both were crushed. And that's created this situation that we're in. If we can find a way to be able to break through the silos, break through everybody's independent sort of justified angst and
Mhm.
issue, but that's not widespread justice. And what Dr. King was, in the entirety of his arc of the universe, is long and wide, but it bends towards justice.
Yes.
And that's where we're in the midst of. And so for me, though, the time is ticking out of the hourglass. We've got crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. But when you understand this many people have complete control, then you understand that they've inverted and perverted everything that we think we are. So when you hear that version of, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. Yeah, no, we're not. It's really a democracy, but it's also, you got to understand the litany of laws and this and that. And then you understand, oh, they can trick me into submission. Yeah, we have to overcome the madness of oppression by criminals. And that's the key consideration, because we have all the laws in every different direction that have learned these lessons throughout our history. They're just not being, we don't have the critical mass to force, and this is what's so ridiculous about the moment, but it's the truth. We don't force those that we put into power to be able to obviously use the government of, by, and for the people, for the people. What we've done is we perverted it, which leads us to the two animated versions of what the Clean New Deal are, which, of course, all of the work that we've done to create the larger investigation so that we actually have a real congressional mandate, because we've created a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption and fascism. It fuels through what? Through a presidential candidate who champions all of these things, because you cannot force Congress at this stage of the game to all get on the same page. It's very unlikely to have a political party to where everybody could get on the same page. However, if we were able to find millions upon millions of Americans to join us in our crusade, arm in arm, brother and brother, sister and sister, to walk to the promised land that Martin Luther King challenged us with, and as did Thomas Jefferson, as did
Yes.
Benjamin
Yes.
Franklin, as did, and so on and so
Yes.
forth. If we fulfill our destiny, which is what I call the Clean New Deal, then the only way we're going to do it is how?
We need any 80 million votes. Okay. So let's talk brass tacks. Okay. Let's talk to the 2024 presidential election. There's going to be a certain number of people who are going to vote Joe Biden if he's the nominee, period. Not that many, but a certain number. There's going to be a certain number of people, if the Republicans nominate Donald Trump, he's likely, who are going to vote Donald Trump regardless. Right. Okay. In my opinion, right, those minimalist bundles who, regardless of the situation, are going to be there, are a certain percentage of the country right there, of that electorate right there, right? We need to cobble together out of the disaffected Republicans, the disaffected Democrats, and the massive swath of Americans, over 40% of the country, who identify themselves as independent, not including half the country who doesn't vote at all. We need to cobble together 80 million votes behind an independent candidate for the presidency who is not owned by the wealthy elite. We and the way we go about doing that is we do this national barnstorming tour where we bring to the American people the merits of how did we get where we are now? 2 hour session. How did we get where we are now? And how do we get out of this? How do we fix America? How do we restore our sovereignty in our country, in America? And that we can do this right here, right now, right? Because if we can get 80 million Americans to coalesce behind a ticket, president and vice president, giving a mandate for the Clean New Deal, which will have the two components. One, which is what so many Americans need right now, is their nation to recommit in building out the American middle class, restore the New Deal, but the modern version, the clean New Deal, right? We're facing climate change, we're facing a number of things, but we're also facing the worst wealth and income inequality in our nation's history, right? So we need to rebuild the American middle class and have real teeth in what that looks like and stuff like that. The other thing is we absolutely have to hold people to account for the trillions from the American people alone. We know since 1980, $50 trillion has been transferred from the working class and the middle class up to the top 1%. That did not happen by accident. That happened in legal ways and illegal ways, in all types of horrible ways. We need to hold those people to account. But it's worse than that. It's worse than that, as your work has proven. We need to hold people to account for the looting of the Treasury, for the looting of the Federal Reserve, okay? And because they did break laws, and they did have the complicity of elected officials, and they did have the complicity of the court system, right? But with 80 million people giving a mandate to do those two things, rebuilding the American middle class, holding the people who robbed the working and middle class of this country of trillions and trillions of dollars, right? Those two things, we can restore the sovereignty of this country. And all it takes is an independent president who has the authority to appoint independent counsel and empowered with the mandate. We can ask our legion of people who've been waiting for their country to say, yes, I'm ready to reinvest in you, right? Okay. We can ask them to go down ticket. Don't vote for anyone who has not served you. Don't vote for anyone who, when you look at all the issues you consider important, they tell you it's dead on arrival, because we know none of the things that most of the American public support right now. Pick an issue, any issue. None of the things that the American public support right now are possible in this Congress. So stop voting for them. Vote for anyone. Vote for the challenger, but don't vote for anyone who does not work for you. You do that and you elect our guy, and whoever survives the Congress will be scared shitless to challenge our new governing coalition, because we would have thrown out the highest percentage of incumbents in history if we just do that simple thing. So this is the game plan, because we have warriors out there right now who are trying to hold people to account. You know it as well as I do. They can't get a toehold because the courts are owned by the wealthy elites. The politicians are owned by the wealthy elites. The media is owned by the wealthy elites. Each party is owned by the major parties, owned by the wealthy elites. And therefore we can't get a toehold. But we got an opening with the presidency. America doesn't want Biden. America doesn't want Trump. There's some people who do, but the mass majority of us don't. Let's seize the opportunity, and then we can do something about it.
You identify things that all of us recognize, but I want to re-emphasize. Once again, we're faced with the lesser of two evil approach. And what I want to remind our viewers and anybody who shares this is that it's 2024, sorry, still getting used to it. We've known about most of this stuff since the 70s. It's gotten worse each and every time. We can do some pretty big time markers like 2000, September 11th, 2001, September 15th, 2008. However you want to, interpret all things COVID. But the one thing I can tell you, regardless of where people go with COVID, is that there was a continuation of everything we're talking about, because there was trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars transferred to the top 0.0001% through all of these different sort of scenarios. And it just continues to get worse and worse and worse. And what we're providing, which is exactly on the money. And you might be asking yourself, but wait a second. Okay, so who is the president so I can judge them? Are they going to say everything that you're talking about? Are they going to check off all the boxes? And the other thing I got to be able to consider through this whole thing is that, oh, somebody's going to start talking about class warfare. Oh, wait a second. You're talking about like the prima donna who is the, what do they say back in the 70s of the, the African American woman with a bunch of kids getting, so, her checks.
Oh, the welfare,
Welfare
the
queen,
welfare
welfare
queen.
queen. And what
Yeah.
we've known literally for the last 13 years is that the real welfare queens are these giant, enormous CEOs of these companies that get all this largesse and, quite frankly, all of the upside and the tens of trillions of dollars and everything to basically lie, steal, and cheat, is what we're telling you. That's the key component of this whole thing. Is this wasn't the natural sort of business cycle. This was an engineered fraud that never ended, and it's landed on all of our different variables of commodities in our so-called free market economy, which is a monopoly that uses these techniques of racketeering to basically create this myth of a capitalist engine. And that's the biggest conundrum. Everything is upside and inside out. So what we're saying, and what Kevin is saying appropriately, is if 80 million of us had the truth, and we know how we got played, we would no longer have them piss on our heads telling us it was rain, because they thought we were some kind of new fool. The fact that the greatest trick the devil ever played to convince the world he didn't exist would not be possible, because the light of justice and truth and liberty would all be on the manners of these guys that have betrayed us the entire time. And so what are the options, really, if you consider what we're dealing with in the long arc of the universe? Well, if we are going to be the United States, if we're going to be a country that's supposedly a democracy, you have one of two choices. We have chaos that leads to carnage through a revolution, or millions of us just use our brains to come together with the facts that we've already aggregated to work together in unison to be able to simply provide the revelations of the truth that get all of the bad people that we know are intuitively corrupt. Everybody says everybody's corrupt and everybody knows that they're stealing, but nobody knows who did what, when, and how. We ended up having a January 6th insurrection. And I thought to myself when that happened, wow, they're finally going after Congress. And it turns out to be in this methodology. Yeah, tens of millions of us ought to be surrounding Congress with the facts of what we're doing to forge the new future, because we've got to remind everybody as we're moving forward, this is real figures. You've said 50 trillion has been since, over the course of however many time, transfer of wealth. No, we provided 70 trillion to this tiny strata through all of these scenarios that we lay out for you, most of which were illegal. That's the biggest part. The full faith and credit of the United States. Go look it up right now in the statutes, people. Federal Reserve Act 13.3 says right in its statute that you do not loan to insolvent institutions. Every financial institution that was on the side of the billions and trillions of dollars of the emergency lending were insolvent. And they got that way through fraud, which just is the easiest thing in the world to be able to prove if and only people were interested in the facts and the law. If they weren't working for the machine that destroyed everybody, which is this massive causality of deception. We're just pulling up the blinders, folks. And if we can find like two of us who have experienced this whole thing, and I want to remind everybody, you served your country. You were in a tank battalion. You were in the theater of war in Iraq and the Middle East. You were somebody who believed in the American dream writ large. I come from a different background, but I am fighting like I may as well be special forces for truth. because the bottom line that we went the distance for liberty and justice for all. So I don't want to get too much more animated. I think we made some really good points here today. But the key ingredients are 80 million people got to come on board with the truth so that we can investigate and then hold the bad actors accountable, of which we've already done most of the work. And then B, we have to have a presidential candidate that champions this, because why a presidential candidate versus a party?
A presidential can't, well, first and foremost, I mean, a party would involve, well, all we need is a president who will have a vice president, right? Who then is in charge of the executive branch, who has the authority to appoint independent counsel. The independent counsel will have the full authority of the Justice Department. The Supreme Court can't ignore them. Congress can't ignore them. This is the problem. The current independent counsel is having impact. The problem, as Bill Black stated so well in that interview you just did, Patrick, is that we appointed this independent counsel too late. Should have been appointed as soon as Biden got elected, so he could have, so he can get the ducks in order, and then you would have the prospect of some criminal prosecutions, and not just a variety of criminal prosecutions, but they had to narrow the scope because they were getting too close to this election here, and then you run into, now if he's reelected or what have you, what's the capacity of enforcing, or even completing litigation that would be in process. So all this is to say, yes, we can focus our concentration on electing a president, because the president has the power to get the foothold we need. The president has the power to curate a mandate that Congress has to listen to, because it's the only national election in the country, right? If 80 million of us stand strong and say it's time for America to both recommit to the build out of the American middle class, and to hold to account the people who robbed us and robbed our country of trillions of dollars, long overdue. And
And
and and so I just want to finish up my comments today for the most part. Patrick, I want to thanking you for this conversation. I want to reference your wonderful and invite people to please take a look at that interview with Bill Black that you had with Bill Black. It was a wonderful interview. Uh, I want to say something specific to MAGA. Okay, specific to MAGA. From my point of view, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for why so many of you support Donald Trump. I'm not going to waste a moment speaking to, his weaknesses and his errors of judgment, and his life of, that, in light of what establishment politicians have done to you. I just know that I understand why you have absolutely no patience, are completely done with establishment politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, right? What I am saying is, there is better. There are people who more reflect your experience, who have been where you have been. We do not have to reach to the billionaire class to save us. We have the talent amongst us to elevate one of us, who are going to be less apt to betray us once they get into power. I know we've heard this story before. We thought we elected one of us with Bill Clinton in the 90s and stuff like that, from Hope, Arkansas, raised by a single mother. We thought we might have found one of us with by electing W, supposed to be a small government, social conservatives and stuff like that. Turns out, not to be all that we cracked up to be. We thought we might have elected one of us for the first time we elect an African American president and stuff like that, coming from, once again, a working class family or what have you. And each one of them found their own profound ways to betray our confidence. And so we're at this moment where now we have Donald Trump as the alternative to the establishment. We are committed to offer a meaningful alternative, an alternative that would be one of us, who we can look at their background, look at their parents' background, look at their parents' background, and see that this is the best of the American working class, the best of the American middle class, and stuff like that. And they won't betray the millions and millions of Americans who have been betrayed by both of these establishment parties. But we need you to just keep an open mind to us. And so that's my comments to MAGA. Nothing but respect, and because we need them as a part of the coalition.
I love the idea and the sentiment, and it has to be one of us that can't be bought or sold. And I love the strategic thinking to be able to elevate a presidential candidate equipped with the truth that we simultaneously impart on tens of millions of Americans who come together, and then we work together almost like a party to hopefully, I mean, we've got ideas who might be the right guys, but we also know reality, right? We all know that nobody's coming to us unless tens of millions of us wrap their heads around this stuff first, honestly. I mean, if we got to 150,000, 350,000, yeah, we could probably start making some noise. If we got to 5 million, we'd make some real noise. If we got to 30 million, forget about it. We're a real player, right? And that's, to me, not impossible, not even close to not impossible, because, this country has done a lot more with less in the past. We've got the truth. We've got the information. We already know who did what, when, and how. We're not starting from scratch. We're starting from having done the work that the $90 billion apparatus of the DOJ, the FBI, the SEC, AGs around the country, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, failed to do. And I think this most important emphasis is that eventually, no matter who we think is coming from us, they all have demonstrated once they became part of the system, they were owned and controlled by the system. But that's because none of us fully understood what control the system has, even though we can all see it with our own eyes. And just look at all of the mammoth mess that's around us. It doesn't matter what your issue is. I promise you, every single issue is tied to the tumor of corruption. And when you understand who did what, when, and how, and what laws aren't being used to hold power to account, you realize what country you live in, which is not the country we think it is, which is why we have so much chaos. Kevin, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we terminate this particular call?
No, that was perfect, Patrick. You summed it up just right. Thank you so much for the talk. Looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Well, and let's just tell everybody, look, if anything that we said today inspires you, look, we'll leave, you'll have our contact information. All you have to do is private messages and we'll get back to you. We need to build people like Kevin and I. We need to get more and more people. We want professionals. We want software engineers. We want people that served in this country, that became doctors, that paid off their loans to become doctors because they believe in the American dream, because they know something's wrong and they know that there's no alternative. We know that, look, the lesser of two evils approach, I could go on for hours and hours and hours about both candidates. But most of us should know what we're dealing with at this stage of the game. The only way we can be cleansed of this problem is for us to collectively, and I've got to believe that our founding fathers truly thought the American people would be the ultimate backstop. So it's up to us.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
There's nobody else that can do it. So onwards and upwards, rise, roar, and revolt. Thank you guys for listening. And Kevin and I will look forward to speaking with you in the near future. All the best. I'll stop recording, Kevin.